It was just autocorrect from Google Maps.
Oh, yes, that's fine. You know what? I correct because I don't know, but you don't have a history of misspelling randomly things, and so I sort of go on autopilot, Alex. I have the red pen in my hand, and I just start anything I see. But I kind of can tell sometimes when it's just a typo or autocorrect, like you said. So I sent out an email. I will be here next week. My son did not make it through Ranger School, which is just so okay. He's okay with it. It was brutal, and he lost several toenails. His feet are in pretty bad shape. He says his extremities are still numb. I got a letter. They ran into a bear on their patrol. A bear, and they threw artillery simulators at it and made it go away. And he spent the night sleeping on the side of a mountain. He said it was like a 45 or 50 degree angle, and it was raining and it was muddy, and we're sleeping. No, it wasn't fun. So for whatever reason, okay, he got dropped, which is kind of a bummer because he spent 3 months of his life. He did 80 days solid of being out in the field like that and only eating. They gave them one MRE in the day and one in the night. These like shrink wrapped pre-made meals. That was it. And they slept. Well, I got a letter. The bear letter said, "Oh, this time's better. We even got to sleep 3 hours last night." So he's home playing video games with his brother now, and warm and dry. So that means I will be here. Also, I have decided, why would I not be hospitable and let anybody who wants to come to my house come? Next week we will meet here because the Scholé group has 1 more week before Christmas. I, however, have 2 more weeks before Christmas because I do 32 weeks. And so, just like I did in the spring, anybody, and I will send this out to your parents, and it's not for 2 more weeks anyway. Anybody who wants to just drive to my house in Orion, I will have a class for you. There may be cookies. If you cannot drive to Orion or you just plain don't want to, I will record the Tuesday class, and I would just really like you to watch the class that week because I will give you like what we're going to read over Christmas break and things like that. And I'm not offended if no one comes. If it's Christmas, you're busy, and for some of you, Orion is a long drive. Just don't sweat it. I will record the class and you can watch it. But you could give me an hour and a half of your life, that week. Yes.
Next Tuesday, right? Tuesday.
No, the next one. Wednesday.
Okay, it's the 14th.
Yeah, the one you don't meet here. So anyway, I'm sorry. I have a bad habit of giving people too much information. Next week we will be here and it will all be normal. But the week after that, and next week I will send out an email to your parents saying, this is the deal. I'm going to send out a class email the week that you don't meet here, just like we are meeting here, and saying, this is what we're reading and this is what we're doing and watch the video. But if anybody just wants to come hang out for an hour and a half at my house and talk about Tacitus, that'd be awesome. So this week, I'm going to ask you to write the comparison. The encomium and invectives that I just handed back showed me that everybody knows what we're doing. Everybody's got it. You got it. And basically a comparison is exactly the same thing, only involving 2 personages instead of only 1. But in the same categories. Yes, you have a question.
Not a question. When it comes to intro that invectives, we know how to hate someone.
You know how to hate someone. Okay. And I feel like there was plenty to hate.
Yep.
Here. And hopefully something to love too. But could you turn with me to page 41 in your book, your reading guide? And this has got the outline and the example. I'm actually not going to read the whole example because it's pretty self-explanatory. And as I said, you all obviously understand what I'm asking you to do because you did it for me. In the example, first of all, look at the outline at the top of page 41. You will see the same sections of this paper, as you just did. A prologue, an introduction, right? State your topic, state your opinion. Then we describe their heritage, their upbringing, their deeds, and then end with some sort of call to either emulate or do not emulate, depending on whether this is wicked or not. The question comes up, do I need to pick two guys who are good or two guys who are bad or one of each? All of the above are fine. It's just going to change how your paper sounds. Yes.
I'm going to try to compare Pompey and Julius Caesar, who in my eyes were pretty much the best of the Romans
Okay.
that we studied the best. Not good, but the best.
Yes.
So I'm going to try to compare two good.
Good. Well, see, then you're in luck because Athonius, our friend Athonius, who does examples of these, this is what he did. He compared Achilles and Hector, who Achilles, the great warrior of the Greeks in the Trojan War, Hector, the great warrior of the Trojans in the Trojan War, but both, we can argue about this later, but both upstanding, brave warriors who cared. Yeah, see, okay. Yeah, okay. This is why I'm having a little trouble with that. So let's just look at the first couple of sections, okay? And I'll let you look at the other ones on your own. So we're supposed to start out with introducing our topic and stating our opinion. His is very short. Seeking to compare virtue with virtue, I set Peleus's son, that's Achilles, alongside Hector. For the virtues deserve honor in themselves, but comparison makes them even more worthy of emulation. So he just told me two things. Who's he comparing? Achilles and Hector. What does he think of them? They're both good. Because he said setting virtue with virtue and comparing virtues. If I were comparing Hector with Hitler, sorry, that's just, I try to think of somebody bad. This is the only thing I can think of. I would say, when one compares the virtuous with the wicked, it makes the virtues of the one shine and the wickedness of the other even more glaring. And so I present to you Hector, who gave up his life for his family and his friends, beside Hitler, who only wanted power and mass murdered. Okay, but anyway, that wasn't very well done, but you get the idea. In my prologue, you would know, okay, she's got one person who's good and one person who's bad because she said so. If I didn't even know who Hitler was, I would know from that prologue, right? And then, of course, if I have two who are equally rotten, then I'm just going to, say something about the multiplying of wickedness in the world and how many examples there are of wickedness. And so I present to you Sulla, who, posted lists of people to kill, and Crassus, who was only eager for money, I think we got the idea. Okay, next is describe their heritage. In the paper you just did for me, you described the upbringing, the background of one person. Now you're going to take two and set them side by side. Do they have similar upbringings or are they different? Let's see what he does with it. They were not born of a single land. Achilles is Greek and Hector is Trojan. But each one is equally worthy of praise. Troy was great. Greece was great. They both come from a good place. Because remember, if I'm praising them, I want them to sound good. And so that's what he does. They were not born of a single land, but each of one equally worthy of praise. The one of Thea, from which Greece took its name, the other from Troy, whose founders were the first among the gods. As being born in a similar land is not worse with regard to praise, so Hector is not excelled by Achilles. A long-winded way of saying they both come from a great place. So they're both great. Next, a description of upbringing. This is the last one we're going to read together. Both born of a land worthy of praise, both were equal in kindred. Oh, this is actually more of heritage. Each descended from Zeus. For Achilles was the son of Peleus, Peleus of Aeacus, Aeacus of Zeus. Likewise, Hector descended from Priam and Laomedon, and Laomedon descended from Dardanus, and Dardanus was the son of Zeus. And with Zeus as their ancestor, they had forebears of equal standing. Achilles had Aeacus and Peleus, of whom the one freed the Greeks from drought and the other killed the Lapus and was allotted marriage to a goddess as a prize for virtue. Hector's ancestor Dardanus at first lived with the gods. His father Priam ruled a city, the walls of which had been built by the gods. As in accordance with the gods and living with one's graders are similar, so Hector is similar to Achilles. So I hope you get the flow. We're just going to say, these two guys are great, their countries are equally great, their families are equally great, their deeds are equally great. Or, these two guys are bad, they're both bad, they're equally bad, both their families are bad. I'm thinking of that Mulan, disgrace on your cow, disgrace on your, okay, that's what I'm thinking. Dishonor, that's it, dishonor on your cow. And then if you have one of each, well, then in each of those sections, you want to do your best to make your good guy sound like he comes from a good place with a good family, and your bad guy sound like he comes from bad. Or somebody asked this about Pompey's dad. You know, it said, everybody hated Pompey's dad. If your good guy has bad in their background, highlight how they overcame it. Right? How they didn't let that keep them down, but they rose above it. And this just shows how very awesome they are. But play it up. Have fun with it. A lot of times modern writing, we don't like to be as, I don't know, profusely flowery in our language. It's not the style we write in anymore, but you just cut loose on this. You play these guys up or down, as the case may be, as eloquently as you wish. Yes.
Actonius did something that I had not thought of doing. He says of Hector, while they lived in his old port of Troy, he stood firm with the gods as his ally. His sent on ruin Troy. Achilles was the leader of Greece under arms. He struck fear of all the Trojans, vanquished them. He had Athene as his ally. So, like, not only where do you come from and who are you, but who do you have backing you?
Who do you have backing you? Exactly. These are, now I'm thinking of Pirates of the Caribbean. They're just like guidelines. Actually, laws. Is it the pirate law? Code. What do they call it? I don't know. Anyway, but they say it's more like guidelines. Yes, anything related to their origins. Anything related to friends, family. This is why these exercises, writing these papers, are an exercise in what we call invention. How many things can you think up to say? And it's an exercise for your mind, because if you start thinking about it and you spread your net, throw your net wider, family, friends, allies, the gods, you can put a lot in there. You can really dress it up. I would like you to include the figures of speech, which at this point are personification. Can I just put purse? It's a long word. Making an inanimate object do something human or animate. The wind moans. The hinges groan. The sleet hissed. See, I've said it screaming. I don't want to be out in that storm if the sleet is screaming. I think you've got this down. We have anaphora, which is simply repeating the same word or a couple of words at the beginning of successive sentences or clauses. At least three is good. We had Thanksgiving. There was pie. There was turkey. There was fun, family, and frolics. And see, now I alliterated too. There was. Litotes. This one's the hard one. I think one of my students, two, and it may have been in here or not, said you negated something, but then you inadvertently turned it into something you didn't mean to say, because maybe it was one of you, I don't remember. Somebody wanted to say that someone was deserving, but it ended up being they weren't deserving because of the way it was phrased. And I know there were at least two papers that I wrote on there. I don't think I see what you tried to do, but I don't think this is what you mean now. So negating the opposite. Thanksgiving was not unenjoyable. And you can do this by just saying, what do I want to say? Thanksgiving was enjoyable. Say it was not the other thing. Say it was not the opposite, and you got it. Yes.
Black keys are not.
No, it's not easy.
Not uneasy.
We are adding metaphor. I'm not going to make you do simile this year, but I'm going to make you do metaphor, which is basically just as bad. A metaphor is a simile in which we don't use the word like or as, but we just say it is that thing. Thanksgiving dinner was like, I know. I'm going to turn it into a metaphor in a minute. Thanksgiving dinner was like a warm blanket of good food, family, and love. All right, that's a very bad simile. Okay, it was just really, yeah. And then that's a simile. To turn into a metaphor, just say it was. Thanksgiving was a warm blanket. It's exactly a simile without the like or as. The king was a tower of strength for his people. That's a metaphor. Or if I say the king was like a tower of strength, that's a simile. Are you all familiar with similes from before in life? Okay, I don't want to beat this into the ground. I would like to add a metaphor. Please, if you could just put even just the initial, in the margin, you have to type it into the paper. They all start with different letters. So just an M, a P, an A, an L, and then I'll know. And I won't have to dig through, and I won't accuse you of not doing something that you did do. You could. Now I need to find an E. Epistrophe. Epistrophe is when you repeat the end. Anaphora is when you repeat the beginning. Epistrophe is when never mind. You don't need to know that. Okay. And then it would be maple. I present to you Julius Caesar, a bronze statue in the Forum, in the Roman Forum, today still. And this is known as the Tusculum portrait, mostly because it was found in Tusculum. And this is kind of important because as far as we know, this was made in his lifetime. This is the only representation of Julius Caesar that we're like 98.6% sure was made while he was still alive. So presumably this is a very, very excellent likeness of a man who, I don't know if we want to call him he's on the good side or the bad side. Honestly, I want to read some statistics to you of the war in Gaul that are shocking, the death toll, but also apparently he just was very likable because he just really got people to do things his way. And I don't know how to explain that other than the fact that just friendly and likable. Yes.
I think that looks at before 10 years were over, his conquest fell that burned about 800 villages.
Yes.
He had killed about 1 million people and driven. He encountered about 3 million people. He killed 1 million of them, and then he captured 1 million more.
Yes. Yeah. You want to read it?
Yes.
Do it.
Well, he had not received the war in Gaul full 10 years when he had taken by storm above 800 towns, subdued 300 states, and up to 3 millions of men who made up the gross sum of those with whom at several times he engaged. He had killed 1 million and taken captive a second. I'm like, that is a lot.
Just stop and think. I mean, oh my goodness. 3 million, just the men. Yes, Kyle, this is important. What about the women and the children? There's a population of 3 million men in Gaul, and he killed 1 million of them and captured another 1 million, who most of those died in captivity, were sold into slavery and then died.
And
That-
those were only fighting men. It's like if they were too old, the men.
This is true. This is true.
It's only fighting men.
It's shocking. They say, I think they guesstimate in the American Civil War, 600,000 North and South. Okay, casualties, which is obviously not a million, but that's huge. But Gaul, France, modern France, this is not a big area. I mean, there's just no comparison. But we know how shocking and the Civil War was, and how devastating it was to that generation. 600,000 young men dead, leaving behind elderly mothers and wives and children. And so just imagine the devastation of an area. Yes, yes. And what, I'm not going to argue the American Civil War, but you might argue that, we brought it on ourselves or whatever. I suppose you could argue the Gauls brought it on themselves. They did keep attacking Italy. But anyway, let's take a look at the life of Julius Caesar. Maybe one of the most pivotal, important persons in history, possibly. If he hadn't been killed, if he had made other choices, history would be completely different. And Plutarch starts off by reminding us that even when he was young, he says a mere boy. I'm on page 199. I'm in the very beginning of it. Caesar was overlooked by Sulla, yet he would not keep quiet, but presented himself to the people as a candidate for the priesthood. Okay, just remember, Julius Caesar's uncle is Marius. Marius and Sulla do not get along. If I'm Julius Caesar and my uncle is Marius, what do? I stay out of sight and keep my head down. I do not want to attract attention to myself. He, however, decides to run for the priesthood, though he was a mere boy. Sulla, without any open opposition, took measures to have him rejected, and in consultation whether he should be put to death, when it was urged by some that it was not worth his while to contrive the death of the boy. Oh, he's nobody. He's nobody. Sulla answered that they knew little who did not see more than one Marius in that boy. And he was right. He was right. We have the famous story, almost every history book tells this story, of the pirates. He flees, he gets out of Sulla's way, comes back, captured by pirates, and he just takes control of the pirates, basically. I mean, the audacity is just incredible. This is on page 200. So you have to know in this story that pirates aren't so interested in killing you as in keeping you alive and making your family pay to get you back. That's where the real money is. It's all fine and good to capture ships and steal their stuff, but the real loot is in ransom money. So they send people off to get the ransom, and it says Caesar made so little of them that when he had a mind to sleep, he would send to them and order them to make no noise. For 38 days, with all the freedom in the world, he amused himself with joining in their exercises and games as if they had not been his keepers but his guards. He wrote verses and speeches and made them his auditors, and those who did not admire them he called to their faces illiterate and barbarous, and would often in raillery threaten to hang them. They love it. They were greatly taken with this, and attributed his free talking to a kind of simplicity and boyish playfulness. Right? He had told them repeatedly, you know what? When you let me go, I'm going to come back and crucify all of you. Oh, isn't he cute? Isn't he just precious? And they let him go, and he got a fleet of ships, and he came back, and I'll be doggone, he grounded them all up and had them all crucified. Wow. So,
I mean, they were even really nice to him as well.
Well, you don't want to damage the goods, or the money won't.
I guess.
So why, we mentioned this with the pirates, but the first question I asked you, what made him so popular with the common people? What are some of the things he did? He was a good speaker. In fact, Plutarch says he was admirably fitted by nature to make a great statesman and orator. And he practiced, but he said, I'd rather be a general than an orator. So it says he settled for second place. Plutarch doesn't say it. I'm guessing Cicero's number one, but he settled for second place. What else did he do?
Also, to earn when Sulla had died, to earn the adoration of the people, he gave his uncle Marius a burial where he displayed two large portraits of Marius and his wife, and soldiers and the people who hated Sulla. And remember the good old days of conquest, that some of them wept openly at seeing the portraits.
Yeah, they were the images, that we talked about. I had that picture where the guy was holding the busts of ancestors, the wax images that Sallust kept talking about.
He kind of gave an encomium for himself, like, this is what I come from.
Yes.
Vote for me.
And I'm going to alter what you said just slightly. It was actually Julia's funeral. It was Julia's funeral that it happened at, and he brought out the images of Marius. Her Julia is his aunt. Julia. But you're totally right. All of Marius's devoted followers were so happy to see him there. But I also want to point out something else. Roman women had it better than Greek women. Right, they had more freedom. But Roman women didn't really get public funerals. Right, it was a thing. And to understand people of the past, we just kind of have to get into their mindset, not be offended by it, but just get into it. And when he decided to have a big blowout for his Aunt Julia, I'm sure all the women loved it. Like, yeah. And it just made him seem very tender-hearted. Oh, look how much he loves his aunt, even though we don't really do that sort of thing for women in Rome, but he's going to do it, and we'll let him do it because it's just lovely how devoted he is to his aunt. And then he parades Marius's picture out, his image, and all the Marius lovers are like, yeah. You remember, Marius was a new man. Marius was from the common people, and so he's like, he's one of us. And so the people loved it. Yes. Yes. Yes.
It is always in the custom of Rome to make funeral orations in praise of elderly patrons, but there was no proceeding of any upon young women until Caesar made one upon the death of his own wife, and this procured him favor, and by this show of affection he won upon the feelings of the people, who looked upon him as a man of great tenderness and kindness.
Yes. It just melts their hearts that he does this sort of thing.
Was his first wife Cornelia?
I don't.
Who did he have?
Calpurnia is the last one, because I only know this from Julius Caesar, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar.
Yes.
Yeah, Cornelia, his first wife, yes. So is there anything else he did? So he wins people's hearts. What else in his behavior won over the common people? Anybody adds?
That's right.
We love it when people pay for our public entertainment, especially if there's food involved and gladiators. It's awesome. It says he was so profuse in his expenses that before he had any public employment, he was in debt 1,300 talents. Somebody has to pay. It wasn't him.
Remember how much talent weighs.
Like 50 pounds of solid silver or gold. And many thought that by incurring such expense to be popular, he changed a solid good for what would prove a short and uncertain return. Money in the bank is money in the bank. You got it, you can spend it. Spending all your money just hoping to be popular, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. And if it doesn't, you're out the money. But it said, in truth, he was purchasing what was of the greatest value at an inconsiderable rate. Once he entertained the people with 320 single combats. Like, how long does one of them take? How many hours? What's your math problem for the week?
Well,
You guess average, do an average
I was counting up the gold.
combat.
I would guess probably about 30 minutes for a combat.
320. So that'd be 48 a day if you did it in 24. You didn't sleep. This went on for a long time, obviously. Just a second, Ethan. And his liberality and magnificence in theatrical shows, in processions, public feastings. He threw into the shade all the attempts that had been made before him and gained so much upon the people that everyone was eager to find out new offices and new honors for him in return for his munificence. Okay, go ahead.
Can I kind of like how much that would cost in like real time, like, the amount of gold?
Yes, if you can do it, yes. He ran for high priest. Got it. That sounds funny to us, doesn't it? I ran for priest. We don't really run to be elected to the clergy anymore, but they did then. And in fact, you didn't even really have to believe in the gods or omens or anything to get elected. Cicero was elected. He was a priest, and he made obvious in his writings that he thought it was highly unlikely that the gods communicated to us through birds and entrails, but he still got elected. It was an elected office. Yes, Alex.
The official title would be Pontifex Maximus.
Pontifex Maximus.
And I remember a long time ago when I was studying Latin, I noticed that sounded a lot like Pons Pontis, which means bridge. So a bridge between the gods.
Yes. Also, and no one is totally sure why. I don't think there's any smoking gun we know, but they also speculate that the Pontifex, the bridge was the main point of entry into the city. So the guardian of the bridge was the guardian of the safety of the people. And nobody knows. This is actually why the Pope is called the Pontiff. The Pontiff. Pontifex Maximus. It's the inheritance of the old Roman, because basically the popes took over the government of Rome when the Roman Empire fell apart. Okay. Did you want to say something, or do you have an answer?
So 13,000 talents of gold
Mm-hmm.
in today's currency is $14,554,800,000.
It's a lot of debt.
So about $14.5 million.
It's a lot of debt. We're going to visit his debt again because we're going to find out who helps him with that. They sent him off to Spain, first of all, for his first command. And Plutarch says that he was passing through a village. Actually, right before that is the thing I wanted to say. Caesar, in the meantime, being out of his praetorship, got the province of Spain and was in great embarrassment with his creditors, because he owes a boatload of money, who, as he was going off, came upon him and were very pressing and importunate. This led him to apply himself to Crassus, who was the richest man in Rome. Crassus took upon him to satisfy those creditors who were most uneasy to him. Crassus paid off a bunch of his debt. Julius Caesar owes him now. You helped me out of a tight spot. Do you ever, Pompey, Caesar, Crassus, the triumvirate. Pompey, yeah, he's the great, awesome. Caesar is Caesar. Crassus, just a dude with a lot of money. How does he get to be one of them? Because, excuse me. Oh my. Because he paid off Julius Caesar's debt. Okay, so he heads to Spain, and he's going through some podunk village. Oh, yes. And maybe, Karsten, in this case, he called it in not as money. You see what I mean? He called in favors from Julius Caesar. I don't know, I'm just reading into this, but he's passing through some villages. Passes through this nothing village on the way to Spain. And his companions say, oh, isn't this quaint? You know, do you think there are people here that are, you know, care about running for office and all the things that seem important in Rome? Do these people have it on a smaller scale? And Caesar says, you know, I'd rather be the first man here than the second man in Rome. I'd rather be number one in this podunk village than be number two back in Rome. Have we met this, I don't know what to call it, sickness of I need to be number one before? Have we had this discussion before? I feel like we have. What? Mm.
I
No.
was also thinking Alexander the Great. So-
Yes. But I mean, even before, just like this in the last few weeks, the idea that we need to be number one. And of course, this leads to Marius fighting Sulla, Caesar fighting Pompey. Got to be number one. Okay, heads off to Spain. And actually, Alexander, you already sort of mentioned this, but let's go back to it because this is the question. Why does Plutarch believe that Caesar surpasses all other Roman generals? Why is he the best? It's actually connected with what you guys just talked about Gaul.
His successes involved
Yeah.
his cleverness, I suppose.
Well, and just, yes, but just success. Here's what Plutarch says on page 209. The many expeditions in which he subdued Gaul showed him to be a soldier and general not in the least inferior. He is not inferior, that is Latotes, to any of the greatest and most admired commanders who had ever appeared at the head of armies. He compares him to the Fabii and the Scipios and everything, but it says, we find Caesar to have surpassed them all. One he may have held to have outdone in consideration of the difficulty of the country in which he fought, another in the extent of the territory he conquered, some in the number and strength of the enemy he defeated, one man by the wildness and perfidiousness of the tribes whose goodwill he conciliated, another in his humanity and clemency to those he overpowered, again in his gifts and kindnesses to his soldiers, all alike in the number of battles which he fought and the enemies he killed. So he says he's just better in every way. Plutarch thinks so. If you look at the difficult places where he was fighting and the type of people he was fighting against and how much his soldiers loved him and how merciful he was to those he captured, and then sheer numbers, and then come in those numbers you guys mentioned, the 800 towns, 1 million war dead, 1 million war captives. Plutarch obviously doesn't mean great in a moral sense, just sheer raw power. And that's what he bases an argument on. And all of this in Gaul. You guys probably know this. So when the triumvirate, Caesar, Pompey, Crassus, started running everything, they arranged for Pompey and Crassus to be consuls and send Julius Caesar to Gaul, where he got that distinction of fighting against the roughest people on the roughest terrain, and the biggest extent, and the most vicious people, and the greatest number of captured. And because it was a place where he could carve out a name for himself, he could be out of the way. But, he wasn't out of the way. Plutarch tells us, actually Pompey's life told us too. He had the habit, he was at Gaul for 10 years, 2 5-year stints. And he would, they didn't fight in the winter. It's cold in the winter, and it's icy and snowy, and it's not pleasant. And so you would just go to winter quarters. Hiberna. Hiberna is the Latin for winter quarters. We get the word hibernate. I just want to hibernate. You go in your winter quarters. This is what I want to do. I just want my winter quarters. But he did not waste the winter. He came back south across the Alps, and he stayed up in northern Italy, still in his territory, because, he wasn't allowed to really cross over with his soldiers or anything. But everybody would come from Rome to visit him. And basically, they would run Rome from little towns in North Italy. Is this in this life? This is what happens when I skip around. Yes. Caesar left his army in their winter quarters. This is page 213. He sat down and employed himself in courting people's favor. Great numbers coming to him continually, and always finding their requests answered. He never failed to dismiss all with present pledges of his kindness in hand and further hopes for the future. During all this time of the war in Gaul, Pompey never observed how Caesar was on the one hand using the arms of Rome to effect his conquests, and on the other was gaining over and securing to himself the favor of the Romans with the wealth those conquests bestowed on him. It's a vicious circle. Hey, Rome, give me some more soldiers and weapons. Okay, got it. Go fight. They they finance his expedition. And what does he use the expedition for? To gain wealth that he feeds back into Rome by bribing people or giving people nice presents, hoping that you will do something for me in return for the present. It's a great gig. He's also doing something else. He's training an army that loves him, an army that will do anything for him. In fact, now I need to find that. Hang on. If you guys are looking, you can help me. But I want to find the part where they talk about what his soldiers would do. The guy who lost his shield, and he was begging Caesar to forgive him just for losing his shield. Okay, I got it. Page 218. Page 218. Sorry. Oh, no, that's not it. Well, shoot. This always happens when I skip around. Okay, I will paraphrase. His soldiers would, if they knew he was watching, they would attempt any feats of bravery just to get his praise. So once upon a time, the enemy they were fighting their way across a river. And the battle was fierce. And one of these guys, just a common soldier, nobody important, but he knows Caesar is watching. He plunges into the river, fights his way through, rescues his companions, but at some point he accidentally lets go of his shield, wades out of the water, dripping wet, wounded, exhausted. And Caesar is about to say, "Well done," or something. And the guy flings himself at Caesar's feet and begs him to forgive him for losing his shield. This is the attitude of his soldiers towards him. They will do anything. You probably know that Julius Caesar wrote an account of his years in Gaul. We know it as Caesar's Gallic Wars or just the Gallic Wars. Often after you finish, your early Latin books, they put you on translating the Gallic Wars because he's very. Did you find it?
I've not found
Oh.
the three.
Oh, that's okay.
The three soldiers, but I have found another time where he.
Okay, what page are you on?
225.
Oh, I was not that far. Okay, you can read it for us if you want.
Okay. So right now he's crossing a lake or a river or maybe even the ocean. I don't know. And there's a storm. Caesar upon this discovers himself, and taking the man by the hand, who was surprised to see him there, said, "Go on, my friend, and fear nothing. You carry Caesar and his fortune in your boat." Mariners, when they heard that, forgot the storm, and laying all the strength to their oars, did what they could to force their way down the river. Okay. So it is.
This is strong wind from the sea, which is weird.
Well, can we go back to that? I'll tell you what the context of that is in a minute. But this is another good illustration, Alex, of what we're talking about. When people know who he is, they're just willing to try anything for him. They're just willing to do anything for him. So back to his book. He wrote an account of his wars there. Some people find it extremely exciting, and I just think it's just lots of battles. It's a lot of battles, but you get to know the tribes people really well in this. But he decided to attack Britain. And I think it's hilarious. Plutarch says people weren't even sure Britain was a real place. Says, the reported extent of which had made its existence a matter of controversy among historians, many of whom questioned whether it were not a mere name and fiction, not a real place. He decided to conquer. Well, he didn't conquer, really. He just sort of stepped on and said hi and fought a couple of battles and left. But, and did lose. But he thought that the Britons were supplying the Gauls. They're all Celtic peoples. Similar people groups, similar language, and he would go to his winter quarters, right, and he'd go and confer with his friends about running Rome, and he'd come back and they're all fresh supplied for the next round of battling, of the next season of the war. It's like, where are they getting all these people and supplies? I think it's Britain. So he headed over to Britain, but they're crazy in Britain, you know, the crazy people who paint themselves blue, and anyway. They got rid of Julius Caesar, interestingly, by sticking sharpened wooden stakes in the bottom of the Thames River. The Thames is the river that London is on today. And they would go up, and the stakes did not stick out above the water. They were below the waterline, but they were tall enough to rip a hole in your boat. And so Caesar's, and you know, I should look into this, but I read that, like, archaeologists have gone diving in the Thames, which is not a very clean river, and they can find the petrified stake bits left from 2,000 years ago of these wooden stakes, chopped off, and but wooden piles stuck in the ground. Anyway, so Caesar's boats come up the Thames and they get ripped open and they start to sink. These guys can't swim. Swimming was not a lot of people today can swim, but in times past, it was not usual.
You were supposed to swing a sword, not swim a
Yes, and you would think that before I signed up to go boating anywhere, I might want to take some swimming lessons, but they did not. So the soldiers are grabbing hold of broken pieces of the boats or whatever, and they're dog paddling their way ashore, and then the Celts are just waiting on the riverside, and they're just killing them all. So they backwater, they get out with everyone he can. He also knows that if he doesn't get back to Gaul before winter sets in, he's going to have trouble getting home because of storms in the channel. So it's going to wait another 80 years, probably longer than that, 90 years, before the Emperor Claudius finally decides to conquer Britain. And this is the conquering that sticks, where they set up Roman forts and build London, which was a Roman fort. Yes.
And then, it wasn't Hadrian, but someone conquers all the way to the boundary of modern-day Scotland.
Yes.
And then Hadrian creates Hadrian's Wall.
Hadrian's Wall. Some of you read The Eagle of the Ninth with me,
Yes.
perhaps. This was about that. So in the meantime, he's spending 10 years refining an army, gathering tons of loot, which he uses to get his way in Rome. And but eventually he's going to need to come back. You can't fight forever. I suppose you can. Well, you're going to run out of Gauls at that rate. He only had 1 million left. It's a non-renewable resource. So eventually he has to come back, and they're going to have to deal with each other. Pompey, Crassus and Caesar are going to have to deal with each other. But Plutarch says this, Caesar, page 218, Caesar had long ago resolved upon the overthrow of Pompey, as had Pompey, for that matter, on his. For Crassus, the fear of whom had hitherto kept them in peace, having now been killed in Parthia, if the one of them wished to make himself the greatest man in Rome, he had only to overthrow the other. And if he again wished to prevent his own fall, he had nothing for it but to be beforehand with him whom he feared. Pompey had not been long under any such apprehensions, having till lately despised Caesar, as thinking it no difficult matter to put him down, whom he himself had advanced. By the way, when he uses the word despised here, it means had contempt for him. It doesn't mean disliked him. That word has changed its meaning slightly. He despised him. He's no threat. I can take him. I'm not scared of him.
This is Mr. Kill a million, take a million.
Yes, but Caesar had entertained this design from the beginning against his rivals and had retired like an expert wrestler to prepare himself apart for the combat. Making the Gallic wars his exercise ground, he had at once improved the strength of his soldiery and had heightened his own glory by his actions, so that he was looked on as one who might challenge comparison with Pompey. Back in Rome, right below this, Plutarch tells us all has not been happy under Pompey and Crassus, who is now dead. It says, nor did he let go of any of those advantages which were now given him both by Pompey himself and the times, and the ill government of Rome, where all who were candidates for offices publicly gave money. And Plutarch says they left the city at last without a government at all, to be carried about like a ship with a pilot, without a pilot to steer her, while all who had any wisdom could only be thankful if a course of such wild and stormy disorder and madness might end no worse than in a monarchy. Frankly, things can get so bad that a king looks good. If anyone will just fix things, I'll do whatever he says. And Caesar knew it. So say that again, Karsten. And he is going to fix things. And he did. But then there was that moment. My 10 years in Gaul are over, and back in Rome, they're talking about me. Not everybody likes me in Rome. Some of them want me to just give up my army. I'd like to come home and have a triumph, quite frankly, because it did kill 1 million people and got another 1 million captives and just got huge hordes of money. And I deserve a triumph for that. But the problem is, that if I come back to Rome for a triumph, I can't come with my army because that's against the rules. And if I want to run for consul, I can't come into the city because it's the rule that I have to stay outside the city if I'm running for consul. But if I want to triumph, I have to come into the city. And in the meantime, he's thinking this over. And back in Rome, they're saying, you know what? Caesar needs to lay down his army. It's done. We gave him 10 years. I know what he's been up to for 10 years. It's time for him to pull the plug on that operation. And he needs to disband his army and come back. And Caesar knows something. When I do, there will be haters in Rome who will find something to charge me with and will take me to court, whether mismanagement, doesn't even matter what it is. They're going to pay people off for the verdict anyway. But the haters are going to come after me. And without my army, I have no backing. If I'm a private citizen, do you know what I learned? Maybe I told you guys this, but I learned last summer doing my Greek. The word for private citizen in Greek is the word that we get idiot. Idiotes, idiotu, nominative and genitive. It meant a private citizen, somebody with no public standing, no power. And it turned in time over to be somebody who's just an idiot. But originally it meant I have no public office. have no public standing, he's an idiot in that sense. If I come back without my army, that's who I am. I have no power. And so I'm going to have to make a decision. And you guys know the story. He goes to the edge of his province. It's the Rubicon River. On this side, I am a general with my army, and I'm legit. On that side, if I step across it with my army, I'm in rebellion. You know, a generation before, they saw a guy march on Rome with his army, Sulla. They know what happens when people march on Rome with their armies. They set fire to things and they kill people. If I cross this river without my army, I am instantly a private citizen. If I cross it with, I'm a rebel. And so he spent all night thinking about it, and then he did it. And famously said what apparently was a proverb before him, the die is cast. I've rolled the dice. Both meaning I'm taking a gamble, and also, you know, after you roll the dice, you can't take it back. Maybe you can, in our family, it's like, oh, that touched my foot. You can re-roll or whatever. But usually, when you're playing dice games with people, your roll is your roll, right? You can't take it back. After he crossed, you can't take it back. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to. I'll just go back. No, he's public enemy. And he marched on Rome. And fascinatingly, let me read what Plutarch says, because he says it better than I do. Yet still Pompey, I'm on page 222, kind of middle-ish. Yet still Pompey at that time had more forces than Caesar. But he was not permitted to pursue his own thoughts, but being continually disturbed with false reports and alarms, as if the enemy was close upon him and carrying all before him, he gave way and let himself be borne down by the general cry. He put forth an edict declaring the city to be in a state of anarchy, and left it with orders that the Senate should follow him, and that no one should stay behind who did not prefer tyranny to their country and liberty. He had more people, has an enormous fleet, and he has the city of Rome. He's there, and he leaves. He runs away. And it says because people would not leave him alone. Oh, did you hear the latest? Caesar did this, Caesar did that. Oh my gosh, it's a rumor. It's just a rumor, but it might be true, so we better do something. Maybe you've had a moment in your life like this. You're just trying to think, right? And people will not leave you alone. I have a decision to make, just leave me alone. And Pompey rolled with it. All right, everybody seems to think we're in trouble. If I stopped and thought, I'd think about the fact that I am manning the city and I have a bigger army, but I'm not thinking about it. So he ran, and Caesar showed up and decided to take money out of the public treasury. I'm just taking the money. And for some reason, I love this little exchange. Metellus, the tribune, says, I don't think you should do that. I don't think you're allowed to do that. Metellus again making resistance, and some encouraging him in it. Caesar, in a louder tone, told him he would put him to death if he gave him any further disturbance. And this, said he, young man, is more disagreeable for me to say than to do. So they let him have the money. Pompey has run away to northern Greece, and Caesar, first of all, he goes to Spain and kind of mops up enemies in Spain, so he doesn't have an enemy behind him. And then Alexander, this is the moment he's crossing on the boat. He's crossing from Greece back to Italy. He's trying to. He shows up at the coast of Italy. I do have a map, but I rolled it up. Okay, Okay, here's Italy, here's Greece. It's like a boot. Okay, here's Italy. It's tipped this way in Greece. And it's not very far across, right? If you go from the heel of Italy over to Greece. And so Caesar had gotten to the coast, and he crossed over with some of his soldiers, but not all of them. He was waiting for the main forces. This is another example of his soldiers' attitude towards him. They're following him, but here's what they're saying. When at last and where will this Caesar let us be quiet? He carries us from place to place and uses us as if we were not to be worn out and has no sense of labor. Even our iron itself is spent by blows, and we ought to have some pity on our bucklers, our breastplates, which have been so long used. Our wounds, if nothing else, should make him see that we are mortal men, which he commands, subject to the same pains and sufferings as other human beings. The very gods themselves cannot force the winter season or hinder the storms in their time. Yet he pushes forward as if he were not pursuing, but flying from an enemy. So they talked as they marched leisurely towards Brundusium. But when they came hither and found Caesar gone off before them, their feelings changed and they blamed themselves as traitors to their general. He left without us? Well, it was a tricky crossing because the wind blows the wrong direction. I mean, it's not always the wrong direction. It depends on which way you want to go, right? But it's often against you. And so Caesar was over there. He's like, where's my army? Where's my army? Are they coming? I'm going to go find them. So he gets in this little fisherman's boat, the part that Alexander read. And he throws himself down. He's just incognito, you know? And the guy's like, oh, the wind's bad. We need to turn around. I am Caesar. Do not fear. You carry Caesar's fortune in your boat. It's like, oh, well, that's a surprise. So he keeps trying. Unfortunately, he does have to turn back the wind. Even Julius Caesar does not command the wind. I think maybe he knew that. Maybe he forgot sometimes. They finally got across. And he fights Pompey and actually has the worst of it. Pompey has a bigger army. And Plutarch tells us, they're blocking, I love this, I have to read this. They're blockading Pompey's camp. And it says on page 225 that they were, Caesar was at the beginning but ill supplied, and before the end was extremely pinched for want of necessaries. So his soldiers were forced to dig up a kind of root which grew there and tempering it with milk to feed on it. Sometimes they made a kind of bread of it, and advancing up to the enemy's outposts would throw in these loaves, telling them that as long as the earth produced such roots, they would not give up blockading Pompey. We've got plenty to eat. We'll eat the roots. The battle goes so poorly that on page 226 we hear, Caesar's affairs were so desperate at that time that when Pompey, either through overcautiousness or his ill fortune, did not give the finishing stroke to that great success, but retreated after he had driven the routed enemy within their camp. Caesar, upon seeing his withdrawal, said to his friends, the victory today had been on the enemy's side if they had had a general who knew how to gain it. I would have lost today if Pompey had followed up. This is the next question I asked you. Why did Pompey follow and engage Caesar again? What made him do it? He didn't have to right then. Could have got even more people and brought his ships together. But he went ahead and fought him. Why? It's really kind of sad. Page 227. Not so much that. It says, Pompey had no mind to fight him. But everyone else upbraided Pompey for being reluctant to fight and tried to goad him on by such nicknames as Agamemnon and King of Kings, as if he were in no hurry to lay down his sovereign authority, but was pleased to see so many commanders attending on him and paying their attendance at his tent. The answer is peer pressure. Why aren't you going to fight him, Pompey? Wait, you're going to go fight. Are you scared? We about beat him that other time. Why did you fight? You know, I want to go home. I'm tired of this. You said we were just going to clean this up. Just do it already. And then they go back to the camp And do you remember in the life of Pompey, it said they were divvying up Rome. Hey, you want to be high priest? Yeah, I'm gonna be quaestor. You be high priest. Who should we make consul when we get back? Like it's already done. One guy, I think it loses something in the translation. I see this all in every book about this, but it doesn't strike me as particularly funny. This guy was supposed to be funny. He said, "Oh, I guess we will gather no figs in Tusculum this year." In other words, well, I thought we'd be home by the time the fruit ripened. Are you kidding me? I'm still here? Why would Pompey do something about this? And they nagged, and they nagged, and they nagged, and he fought. Do not think peer pressure is only teenagers. Peer pressure can happen to anyone at any time when a group of people tells you to do it their way. And you just get tired of listening to it. So he did it. It says Pompey was driven against his will by this kind of language into offering battle and proceeded to follow Caesar. They went to a town called Pharsalia in northern Greece. And at the bottom of page 227, listen to this. Listen to the odds. They were 5,000 Pompey's cavalry, 5,000 against 1,000 of Caesar's.
Cavalry.
And infantry, there being 45,000 of Pompey's against 22,000 of the enemy. Oh, I know. Pompey has twice as many men and 5 times as much cavalry. And Julius Caesar, partly because he had a crack fighting force that loved him and would do anything for him, do anything to show how brave they are while he's watching, right? And Pompey had a bunch of newbies. And a lot of the newbies, Plutarch tells us, really like young, good looking. It says they had their hair long, and they're looking good, and I'm my horse, and I'm just awesome. And Caesar said, so you know your javelins? Don't point them towards the horse, point them towards their faces. They won't like that. They got pretty faces and they don't want to mess their faces up. And it works. Everybody's like, oh, I'm turning my horse around. I don't like the javelins pointing at my face. I'm too pretty for that. And it falls apart. Oh, I would too. I'm not. I'm making fun of them, but they did sign up for a battle. Things happen in battle. So this is possibly the saddest sentence in this entire 2-volume set. Page 229. Once in disorder, presently they turned about to fly, and so most shamefully ruined all. These are the guys who don't want their faces marred. For those who had beat them back at once outflanked the infantry, falling on their rear, cut them to pieces. Okay, now here comes the sad sentence. Pompey, who commanded the other wing of the army, when he saw his cavalry thus broken and flying, was no longer himself, nor did he now remember that he was Pompey the Great. That makes me sad. I'm Pompey the Great, for crying out loud. I've got twice as many soldiers. Get a grip, Pompey. Pull your guys together and do it. And we already read this in the life of Pompey, right? He wandered off to the camp and just sat in a chair. What just happened? Until Caesar's guys come into the camp. He says, what? What? They're in the camp too? And he wanders off alone to the seashore and gets on a fishing boat. He's Pompey the Great. And he ends up headless on the beach in Egypt. Because he forgot he was Pompey the Great. Now, I don't know. Caesar has a lot of skill, obviously. He won a lot of battles. You don't just accidentally kill 1 million Gauls and take another million. It doesn't just happen. But, there's, I'll call it fortune or luck And I hope you know what I mean. I'm not trying to be pagan, but there's a certain element of just things happen. And whether it is providence, we're actually going to read a book next April. It's going to talk about the Wheel of Fortune. It's going to, where the phrase Wheel of Fortune comes from, about fortune dishes out. Last year we read about Zeus has 2 jars, it said in the Iliad, and he dumps out good things from one jar and he dumps out bad things from the other jar. But it says he never just dumps only out of the good jar. Sometimes you get only the bad jar, and sometimes you get a mix of the good and bad jar, but apparently he doesn't. He's not real keen on the good jar. Anyway, it seems like there were a lot of providential or fortuitous circumstances for Caesar to come out on top, even though he's very skillful. You see what I mean? If Pompey had only remembered he was Pompey the Great, Julius Caesar might have been the dead one. And then so much of history would be changed. So he went on. He followed him to Egypt. Was very sad to find him dead, supposedly. Forgave the people who had sided with Pompey, including Brutus and Cassius, 2 of the guys who are going to kill him in a couple of years. Went to Egypt. There was a problem because the king of Egypt and his sister kept arguing. His sister happened to be named Cleopatra, and she's gorgeous apparently. And she smuggled herself into Julius Caesar by rolling herself up in a rug, so they say, because she couldn't just get in to talk to him. He was supposedly on her brother's side, but she just laid down and had herself rolled up in her, delivery of a Persian carpet for Mr. Caesar, and he unrolls it, and Cleopatra's laying in it. And it was very clever. She was charming, and so hung out there long enough, at least for her to have a child. Which technically doesn't take a lot of time, but anyway. And then headed east, cleaned up the Parthians. This is where he famously, they said, "Hey, Caesar, how's it going?" I'll tell you how it's going. Wainy, weedy, weechy. I came, I saw, I conquered. That's my battle report. 3 words in Latin. Brilliant. Then he headed across Africa. So this is my map again. Okay, this is the Mediterranean. So here's Africa. He's heading across Africa. Cato, remember our friend Cato, who's very grumpy a lot of the time, it seems like, and naysays everything, has holed up with some resistance, finds out Pompey is dead, finds out Caesar's on the way, kills himself. And Caesar supposedly said, "Cato, I must grudge you your death as you grudged me the honor of saving your life. I would have forgiven you." That's 234. 234. There is an epic poem about this. It's called the Pharsalia. It's by a poet named Lucan, Lucan. Over Christmas, that could be your Christmas break now. I expect you to read it. It's actually really good. It's really exciting, and it spends a lot of time with Cato in Africa. Then he heads off to Spain one more time to deal with Pompey's sons. Pompey is dead, but his sons are still fighting Caesar, and he needs to take them out. And he does. Yes.
Oh, sorry, this is not about that.
It's-
Back in
okay.
Africa,
Yes.
when Cato learns, when Cato dies and
Mhm.
Cicero learns about it, Cicero actually ends up writing an encomium upon
Cato. And then Caesar writes an anti-Cato, which doesn't mean he doesn't like Cato, but he just didn't want to be shown up by Cicero. He came back and he had a triumph for beating the sons of Pompey. This is the next question I asked you. A lot of people didn't like this much. Why not? He went off and fought a battle and he won. Shouldn't he get a triumph? What did they not like? I'm looking on page 235. It's kind of third of the way down. The triumph which he celebrated for this victory displeased the Romans beyond anything. For he had not defeated foreign generals or barbarian kings, but had destroyed the children and family of one of the greatest men of Rome, though unfortunate. And it did not look well to lead a procession in celebration of the calamities of his country, and to rejoice in those things for which no other apology could be made either to gods or men than their being absolutely necessary. People didn't like it. Yes.
Tells where his heart is. He treasures position over the lives of fellow Romans and the welfare of the city. He is ready to kill whoever needs to die, or he wants to die.
Yes. So some of you read Julius Caesar with me once upon a time, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. And this was a while ago, a couple of years now, but so it might be a little fuzzy, or you might not be familiar with it, which is fine. But Plutarch is one of Shakespeare's main sources for his play Julius Caesar. He uses the story of Plutarch. And Plutarch tells us that when Julius Caesar comes back and they're having this triumph and everything, the common people are out, decorating statues. That they're putting laurel wreaths on statues of Julius Caesar and festooning them. And a couple of tribunes came around and said, "What the heck? You used to like him. You used to like Pompey, I mean, and Pompey's sons. And you're celebrating for Caesar for killing them?" And they started removing all the garlands and everything. And Caesar found out about it, and he got pretty mad with these tribunes. Shakespeare apparently loved this episode because right at the very beginning of his play, that's how he starts it. The people are festooning statues of Julius Caesar, and the Tribune says this. This is Shakespeare talking now, okay? This is a work of fiction, but based on Plutarch. He's talking to the common people who are decorating these statues. "Wherefore rejoice? What conquest brings he home? What tributaries follow him to Rome, to grace in captive bonds his chariot wheels? You blocks, you stones, you worse than senseless things. Oh, you hard hearts, you cruel men of Rome, knew you not Pompey? Many a time and oft have you climbed up to walls and battlements, to towers and windows, yea, to chimney tops, your infants in your arms, and there have sat the livelong day with patient expectation to see great Pompey pass the streets of Rome. And when you saw his chariot but appear, have you not made a universal shout? That Tiber trembled underneath her banks to hear the replication of your sounds made in her concave shores. And do you now put on your best attire? And do you now call out a holiday? And do you now strew flowers in his way that comes in triumph over Pompey's blood? Be gone! Run to your houses, fall upon your knees, pray to the gods to intermit the plague that needs must light on this ingratitude." By the way, there was an aphra. And do you now? And do you now? And do you now? This is Shakespeare's interpretation of this episode. And Shakespeare tells us other things in his play, too, like the fact that they offered him a crown. But he refused it. But he seemed to not want to refuse it. He had, just a second, let me say this, and then he had tons of plans. He came back from it. "I'm going to go to war against the Parthians. I'm going to dig a canal across the Isthmus of Corinth so we don't have to go all the way around the Peloponnese. I'm going to divert the Tiber and make it more navigable. I'm going to drain all the marshes. I'm going to reform the calendar." That's the only one he actually got done before he died. The calendar was getting, if you base it on moons instead of days, eventually it gets out of sync, and then suddenly you're having, Christmas in July. And so you've got to fix the calendar, and they call it the Julian calendar. But it says the thing that brought upon him apparent and mortal hatred was his desire of being a king. Did he want to be a king? Don't know. Made himself dictator for life. Do know that. Don't see much difference between king and dictator for life.
There really isn't.
The day before his assassination, he supped with Marcus Lepidus. And as he was signing some letters according to his custom, as he reclined at table, there arose this question, what sort of death was the best? At which he immediately, before anyone could speak, said, a sudden one. Plutarch tells us the same thing. Oh, by the way, answer the last question. What was fortuitous about where he died?
He died at the foot of Pompey's statue.
Pompey's statue.
And the book makes a point to say as if Pompey had presided over the revenge on his past.
Yes. And now, what did you want to say earlier?
I forgot. Don't worry, I don't think it was very important. Oh.
I'm sorry to do that to you.
There it is. Okay, I watched the movie. I watched the movie that was made out of the play.
Yes.
Which pretty much had a word
for
it. But he ends up fainting for Julius Caesar when he wants to be crowned, but the people don't want him to be crowned.
Mm-hmm.
He ends up fainting or whatever because he was so disappointed that these people
didn't want him to be king.
And a couple of lines. Two of the senators were discussing it. The people say he had falling sickness. No, it is we who have
the falling sickness. The falling sickness is epilepsy. Apparently, Julius Caesar was epileptic. And he had seizures. I don't know, and he could blame sometimes on that, but that's a great line, Alex. Yeah, they say he has the falling sickness, epilepsy. You know, we have the falling sickness. We're all going down because this guy's going to be king. They gathered around him and they stabbed him to death. And Plutarch tells us that Brutus made a speech in which he explained that this had to happen, that Brutus says, just like my ancestor Brutus, who threw out the Tarquins, I had to throw out the kings. But they also, Plutarch just gives us a hint. He says they also let Mark Antony speak. And we don't know what Mark Antony said. But it does say the crowd was stirred up, that his will, Julius Caesar's will, was read, and they found out that he left a little bit to everybody in Rome, and that their emotions were played on. Shakespeare brilliantly took this little hint, and he turned it into a magnificent speech, with Mark Antony standing over Julius Caesar's body, saying, I'm not here to stir you up. I totally agree with Brutus. It's all fine. He says that with his words, but he has the opposite result. And he means to have the opposite result. And I am going to just read a section of it. You want to say it before you?
One of the most powerful lines that I heard from that, I didn't kill Caesar because I hated him, but that I
loved Rome more. Brutus, yes. Brutus was in Shakespeare's play, Brutus is very matter of fact. Well, he's going to be king, so he had to kill him. Done. It's obvious. Any intelligent person can see that. Okay, done. Mark Antony, you say a few words. This is what Mark Antony, this is the beginning, but this is the most famous portion, which everybody ought to hear at least once. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones, so let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men, come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me, but Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal, I thrice presented him a kingly crown, which thrice he did refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and sure, he's an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? Oh, judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Bear with me. My heart is in a coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me. And he goes on, he opens the will, and it turns out that he stirs the whole city. This is Shakespeare's version. In Plutarch's, it takes a little longer. But eventually, they do come after Brutus. They come after Cassius. They being Mark Antony and Octavian, Julius Caesar's grandnephew, known to us in history as Augustus Caesar. Eventually, Augustus and Antony are going to have another falling out. There's going to be another two guys against each other. Antony hangs out with Cleopatra. More than hangs out like 3 children worth of hanging out. All right. Despite the fact that he happens to be married to Octavian's sister back in Rome. Ouch.
Yeah, that ends up becoming a huge problem.
It does. And so finally, they also have to have their showdown. And it happens also in Greece, off the coast of Greece, near a place called Actium, the Battle of Actium. And Mark Antony and Cleopatra run away and go to Egypt, where they both end up killing themselves. And who's left? Octavian. And there is no challenger. There's no new Crassus or Pompey or Antony or anybody. It's just Octavian. And he needs to put this place back together again because they've had 80 years of this. One general after another coming and marching on Rome and turmoil and bloodshed. And we got to put this back together or we're all going down. And amazingly, Octavian puts it back together. Turns it into something else, but puts it back together. Yes, sir.
There's always that one guy in the triumvirate.
The loser guy.
And then it was that
Lepidus.
It was out in the first few years, and then the two.
It's just a placeholder. For next week, I want you to begin our final, well, I say our final history book. We are going to read a history of the church, and it is a history book, but it's history. It's going to be quite different. Okay, it's not Roman history. But you will notice that in week 14, as you turn it and you look at your reading, I would like you to read through these 2 pages. And I would like you to just underline or highlight anything you find interesting. Augustus Caesar, later in his life, posted a list this is page 45, a list of the things he wanted to be known for, a list of the things he did that were important. They're called the Res Gestae Divi Augusti, things done by the divine Caesar, basically, the deeds accomplished of the divine Caesar, of the divine Augustus. And I just want you to take a look at them. I didn't list all of them. That's why there are some numbers. They're numbered, but not all the numbers are there. Because I just listed the ones I thought you might find most interesting. These are what he wanted to be known for. Tacitus, our next author, was born in the 50s AD. Okay? He was born like Caligula, Claudius time, all right? And he grew up under those emperors. Here, I have some stats on him. He was consul in 97, and he was the governor of Asia, and he wrote several books. His father-in-law, Agricola, was, see, I really want to know what they're talking about. It's just really fascinating. It's like, isn't that brilliant? Okay, that is exciting. Okay, his father-in-law, Agricola, was the governor of Britain, and he wrote a book called Agricola. Yay, my father-in-law is awesome. he wrote a book called Germania about the Germans, the German tribes. And his point was kind of, Romans have gotten soft and lazy and those Germans are tough. And apparently this book was used a lot by the Nazis because they ruined a perfectly good book. Because he said something about purity of blood in the Germans and how warlike and hardy and their wonderful physical constitution and everything, and it got twisted out of shape. But Tacitus was trying to say, these guys are pretty awesome. We used to be awesome. Saying the same thing Livy said and Sal said. But he wrote a book called The Annals. You know, annual means every year, and annus means year in Latin. So annals are when you write a history, but you kind of record it year by year. And then this year this happened, and then this year. And he starts with Augustus. He wrote about a period of 54 years, but we only have 40 of the years. Some of the chapters have gotten lost. And it's divided, your book is divided into parts, and each part has chapters, okay? So we're reading part 1, chapters 1 through 5. Don't try to read parts 1 through 5, okay? Because I don't even know there are 5 parts. Just start at the beginning, and it should say chapter 1, and read chapters 1 through 5. And this is, I don't want to say too much, and also I need to let you go, about what Augustus did to turn things around and how he turned it from a mess into a state that was stronger than it had ever been before. It is an important book. So I want you to read the first 5 chapters, and then and I think that's enough background to let you know. You're going to very quickly get into the life of Tiberius, who was Augustus's successor, and you're going to be reading a lot about treason trials. It does not take very long in the empire before saying anything bad about the emperor and his family turns into treason, and it's a capital offense. It's not pretty. Also, remember, as you start, Augustus, in the days of Caesar Augustus, a decree went out to all the Roman world that they be taxed, right? That they be counted and taxed. The book of Luke tells us this is Caesar Augustus. This is it. And when you get, I think you're reading up into Tiberius's life. Tiberius is emperor when Christ dies. He's the emperor of the crucifixion. To put it in perspective, the most monumental thing of the history of the universe was happening. And they didn't even know. They didn't even know. Tacitus didn't know. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for your patience. Have a good week, and I'll see you next time.